Hi, I'm Jackson Bird, and 5 years ago, I posted a video to this channel that kinda changed my life.
I am transgender. Yep. Okay, said it on the internet now, so that's that. Cool.
A lot's changed since posting that video. I'm 30 now and have been publicly out as and living as a man for 5 years. 5 years of becoming more and more comfortable with who I am, and less fixated on what that means. You know, I said in that video 5 years ago that I just wanted to be me, without having to think about it all the time, and I think I'm just about there. Now, while I do in many ways think of that spring of 2015 as the starting counter for my transition, I also tend to think of it less as a beginning and more as a turning point and a culmination of 25 years spent searching for words that I wasn't sure were out there, of squinting between the lines for anything that would explain this gnawing feeling at the back of my mind that something was off. You know, we call it transition because it is a gradual, multi-step process, not a one-and-done overnight transformation. For me, it wasn't even one light bulb realization of being trans, but rather a series of moments, opaque, messy, terrifying, and paradoxical, spread across my entire life. One thing that eventually helped me make sense of it all was watching other trans people's transition timelines on YouTube. The messier and more non-linear, the better. So now I want to share mine. The story is far from over, but here's the first few chapters.
Is the light blinking?
Yes. And where is it
When I was around 4 years old, my favorite color changed from pink to blue. I started refusing girl clothes and asking for a short haircut like my brothers. Every now and then, I would be pressured to dress or behave more like a girl should, remarks that would leave pinpricks of shame, but weren't enough to make me swap my ripped jeans for a dress, or at least to feel comfortable in one on the rare occasions I tried. As I got older and started wanting to fit in, I would cycle through phases of trying to be the girl I thought I should, changing my clothes, my hair, emphasizing my more acceptable girl interests. Though it sometimes made me happy to blend in, it never lasted, and often left me even more confused because despite the external approval, it still didn't feel completely right. Here and there, I got brief flashes of information about gay and trans people, and sometimes wondered if I fit somewhere in those words. But the culture I grew up in the Texas suburbs taught me, both in words and in actions, that being those things was a choice, and that it was the wrong choice. So I pushed away any wrong feelings I had and focused on my expected attraction to boys, and being attractive to boys. And now comfortably swaddled in the gender-conforming heterosexual majority, the LGBTQ community wasn't in my orbit. I wouldn't have even been able to tell you what LGBTQ stood for, really. I had siloed myself away from the hints I needed to start making sense of my persistent yet deeply buried feelings. I swallowed them down as I straightened my hair. I rationalized them as irrational and leaned into the typically feminine interests that I'd been allowed to explore. I convinced myself that I probably wasn't actually meant to be a guy, and there was nothing I could do about it anyways if I was, so I might as well try to make the best of things. But as I entered college and upheavals in my life wore down the protective armor I'd built up over the years, those true feelings started coming to the surface. My first semester, I met a real-life trans person for the first time. I learned what it actually meant to transition, what the letters in LGBTQ stood for, and where my place might be in them. I was overjoyed and overwhelmed. It pulled me into a deeper depression. I'd been dragging this invisible weight behind me my entire life and more or less learned to cope with it. Now, I finally figured out how to free myself from it. But the only way to do that was by making the weight visible to everybody else. The idea terrified me. So I spent 5 more years keeping it to myself. Behind closed doors, I took selfies. So many selfies. In hindsight, it's all very cringe, but in the moment, there was a certain captivating power in seeing brief flashes of who I could be. In my day-to-day life, my presentation became progressively more masculine, slowly more men's clothes and less makeup. I tried binding, and once I got a proper binder, I never went back. Even when I made half-baked attempts to look like a normal young woman. As I went through college, my dysphoria and depression lent themselves to sort of self-imposed isolation. I made hardly any friends at either of the universities I ended up attending, but I did start getting involved with online communities, feeling more comfortable being myself behind a screen, even if I wasn't exactly sure who myself was.
Alright, hey guys, I am recording my first of what I hope will be a long series of videos for this Tumblr, and I guess just like for life in general. I'm recording this right now because my roommates are actually all gone. At least I hope they are, because I'm not out to anyone. Yeah.
Apart from online confessionals, I remained in the closet as my public-facing online work spun into an actual career, one which required me to be at events, on stages, in front of cameras, all while trying to figure out how to present myself in a way that was professional and not too out of place for my assumed age and gender, but also didn't make me sick to my stomach. My skin was forever crawling with discomfort. But here and there, I was able to put those feelings into a box and just have fun. I couldn't ever shut the lid on the box though, and even while some parts of my life were accelerating at an exciting pace, on the inside I felt like I was constantly taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So I decided to take a big, definitive step forward. I cut my hair.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
A friend who was there would later tell me that day it was like I broke free from chains that had been holding me down. And I felt that lightness. Over the next year, I gradually started dressing and behaving so close to what I now knew was the real me that it was almost like I was completely out, just without having said the words. Still, there were times that not having said those words and not quite being in the body that I felt I should would come up against me. When strangers would assume I was a guy until I opened my mouth to speak. When I'd be lumped in with women's groups addressed with the pronoun she. When I attended formal events and had to decide how to dress. On their own, none of those sound so unbearable, but each one was like a sharp pebble that eventually grew into an avalanche, and my defenses were starting to short-circuit. So after years of careful consideration, I decided it was time. My excuses were used up. I couldn't see a way forward as a woman, and after fearing it for so long, I was actually excited about the prospect of transition. I could see a light at the end of the tunnel. All I had to do was take the first step.
All What is happening right now? What's going on?
I am about to go get my first injection of testosterone. Needles, syringes. This little tiny vial is going to do so much. Bam!
Bam!
That's it. The roids, I'm so strong. I've heard that your pee can change smells. I've been trying not to eat asparagus for a while because I don't want that to affect, like, wait, was it the asparagus or the tea?
I mean, I've just generally felt like more clear and like less groggy since starting tea.
It just really feels like testosterone is what my body has always needed.
It just feels right and I feel more calm. It just feels good.
Starting testosterone felt just as good as I'd hoped it would, and more. For the first time in years, I felt like I could actually envision my future and start planning for it. But there was still one major task left to do. Actually coming out. I told my immediate family, my close friends, and my coworkers, but I wanted to wait until I'd had my first injection of testosterone and crossed that milestone all on my own before I opened up to the entire world.
But this is gonna be a real, actual, serious video today. I am transgender. Moving forward, you can call me Jackson or Jack. My pronouns are he, him, his. I know that all of this can take some time to adjust to. I will be patient, I promise. So from the absolute bottom of my heart, thank you.
It was so good.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Okay, good.
it was perfect.
The reactions were overwhelmingly supportive.
My phone is just blowing up with stuff.
I felt a huge sense of relief. The job was done. But the journey, with its many obstacles and unknowns, was just beginning. Even 5 years later, I found this period of my life was the one I least wanted to revisit. When I came out, I split myself open for everyone to see, and while it did feel invigorating to be living my truth, it was a vulnerable truth. One rubbed pink and raw and stinging with static electricity. Everything felt dialed up to 100. I was excited to be moving ahead, yes, but I wished I could fast forward past the initial awkward changes, both to my body and people's reactions to me.
Today is actually my 1 month on T. I'm now 2.5 months on T.
4 months, 5 months, I can go down to this register if I would like. I am over 7 months on T. I am officially going to be getting top surgery on January 6th. I've been wanting this since I was like 11, before I even knew I was trans or knew what you could do about being trans. I'm gonna finally feel like my top half of my body is me and how I felt it should always look. As I recovered from top surgery and approached my first year on testosterone, it felt like every day I was shedding off self-consciousness, feeling stronger, both physically and mentally. I was starting to get a taste of what it felt like to live without my body and identity being at the forefront of my mind all the time. And I was loving it. As time wore on, with fewer landmark moments of transition, I grew into a new confidence. I still wasn't always read as male when I was out and about, and when I was often assumed to be about 10 years younger than my real age, and I still had insecurities about my body, both gender-related and not. But I knew who I was, and being myself wasn't something anyone could take away from me anymore. I didn't originally think I would share my story all that much, but it turned out that after finally being open about something I'd kept hidden for most of my life, I had a lot to say. Welcome to another installment of Ask a Trans Guy. Today I want to share how I legally changed my name and gender marker. I just went to my 10-year high school reunion. Fortunately, it seemed like there were people out there who wanted to hear what I had to say. I was invited to speak at schools and conferences and eventually published my story in an actual book. I wrote a book! I wrote a freaking book! As my job became more and more focused on trans education and advocacy, my trans identity became less and less a focus of my personal life. It's not that I didn't think about it every day still. I knew I wasn't at the ultimate end of my transition to the extent that one exists at all, and I would always be trans. But being trans no longer felt like the sum of my being. I was at ease, and looking to the future from stable ground. And now, 5 years on testosterone, 5 years after coming out, and recently turning 30, I continue to be more and more at peace with who I am. I hope every trans person who wants to gets to feel as ordinary and frankly boring as I often do. It's something I wasn't sure I would ever get to feel. Trans awareness has grown a lot since I first got that glimmer of who I could be. And it's not all positive, but seeing other people share their stories made my eventual coming out a lot less scary. So I hope that this story, my story, makes it a little bit easier for someone else out there. It's hard for me to believe that it's only been 5 years, but I guess that's because it wasn't just 5 years. It was my whole life, and I was being as true to myself as I knew how to be. We don't all get where we're going at the same pace or in the same ways. I guess sometimes the journey, the good and the bad, the breakdowns and the wrong turns, the soaring adventures and roadside discoveries can hold just as much power as the destination. Sometimes you have to get lost to figure out where you're going. And as for me, my journey's far from over.
I got a goosebump pin right here that says Goosebump Rules. I'm Batman.